Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to go over kidney physiology. So we're first going to talk about the anatomy of the kidney, and then we'll move on to the hormones ADH, aldosterone, and ANP. All right, let's jump right into this. So as you can see, the smallest functional unit of kidney is nephron, okay? And what does nephron do? So the nephron basically filters your blood, right? Your blood enters from here, the entrance of the nephron, if you will, and then it will go through this pathway that everything you don't want will enter the ureter, and then bladder, urethra, eventually the toilet, okay? All right, so that is nephron. What is nephron? That's what nephron does, right? And then it really excretes the metabolic waste, regulate the electrolyte balance, your blood pH balance, things like that, okay? All right, so as you can also see, part of the nephron is in the cortex of the kidney and part of it are in the medulla region, okay? So that is just the anatomy of nephron. And then let's zoom in the nephron and then start the journey of filter out the unwanted things in our blood, okay? So we have blood entering our nephron. The first structure is Boltzmann's capsule. As you can see, I highlighted in brown. Then excessive fluids and then also unwanted toxins will enter Bowman's capsule either through diffusion or ion transporter, right? So anything basically smaller than glucose can enter, okay? Things like amino acids, ions like sodium, potassium, phosphate, all these things can enter Bowman's capsule, and of course water as well, okay? All right. And then if nothing gets reabsorbed back into the bloodstream, then everything will go through this pathway and then eventually enter the toilet, enter the ureter, and then bladder, urethra, and toilet, right? But unfortunately, our nephrons have a lot of the regulation that they do absorb different things at different structures, okay? So let's move on to the PCT structure. So PCT is proximal convoluted tubule, okay? So this is the first structure where reabsorption starts, okay? So the bloodstream can really reabsorb things like glucose, amino acids, and then all the ions, and of course water, okay? So PCT is the place where the reabsorption starts, okay? Because you also have bloodstreams that's, attached to all these tubules that they can reabsorb stuff anytime, okay? All right, so that's the PCT. And then we move to the descending loop of Henry, okay? And then this is the ascending loop of Henry. And then the descending loop of Henry, unlike PCT, it doesn't have the ion transporters. So only water can be reabsorbed by the bloodstream through the water transporter, aquaporins, okay? So the descending loop of Henry does have water transporters that can reabsorb water back to the bloodstream, okay? All right, and then we move on to the ascending loop of Henry, okay? That's where we have the ion channels that can reabsorb sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, things like that, okay? And I don't want you to remember every single ion or name of the compounds that each region of the nephron reabsorbs. You don't have to memorize that. The MCAT will provide that in the passage, right? You want to know what's going on. You want to know the big idea, okay? All right, now let's move on to DCT. DCT is the distal convoluted tubule, okay? So DCT also reabsorbs ions like sodium, calcium, magnesium, and it also reabsorbs water, right? But one interesting fact about DCT is some toxins that doesn't get to filtered into the Boltzmann capsule from the get-go will actually be dumped into DCT, like urea or proton. These things that our body wants to get rid of will actually dump themselves into the DCT and then eventually enter the collecting duct and then go to the toilet, okay? That's called secretion, okay? All right. Let's now move on to the collecting duct, okay? That's the purple part here. And then as the name says, you may think, okay, what do we collect? We collect urine, right? So there must be no absorption that's happening in the collecting duct, right? But that's not true. The collecting duct can also have the reabsorption of sodium and water, okay? All right. Once we leave the collecting duct, once the filtrates enter the ureter, then reabsorption stops, okay? Then it's the point where all of this in the ureter and then to the bladder and the urethra will be secreted, okay? All right, so this is the structure of the kidney, okay, of the nephron. So now let's look at the hormone. The hormone ADH and the aldosterone, okay? ADH is also called vasopressin, right? It's an antidiuretic hormone. It's also called vasopressin. And then ADH and aldosterone, they basically have the same and biological effect, which is bumping up the blood pressure. Okay? All right, so why do we want to bump up the blood pressure? Of course, right? Like if somebody who had a car accident, who lost a lot of blood and bodily fluids, then the blood pressure will drop dramatically, right? And then this is a dangerous thing, right? When blood pressure drops, because when blood pressure is too low, then some regions of your body might not get enough blood, right? Oxygen supply due to low blood pressure, okay? So in this case, we activate the hormone ADH and aldosterone to increase the water absorption in the kidney's nephron. And then more water reabsorption back to the bloodstream can increase the blood pressure, okay? So really, ADH and aldosterone, these are hormones that are secreted when you're feeling very thirsty or you're dehydrated, right? Or your blood pressure is super low for some reason, okay? All right, so they both increase the water reabsorption, okay? But the differences between the two hormones effect is they increase water reabsorption through different ways, okay? So let's talk about ADH first. So ADH basically increases water reabsorption at collecting duct. Okay, and then water gets reabsorbed through what? Aquaporins. Okay, more water transporters on the membrane, and then more water can go from the collecting duct to the bloodstream. Okay, so then more water concentration in my bloodstream, that increases the blood pressure. Okay, whereas the aldosterone activated water reabsorption is done through osmotic pressure. Okay, so what it does is at collecting duct and DCT, it increases sodium reabsorption, okay? And then as sodium reabsorption increases, the water reabsorption will follow, right? Because more sodium gets to the bloodstream, that adds the solute concentration. So the osmotic pressure would drag water to the bloodstream as well, okay? So do you think the osmolarity in this case change? Not really, right? Osmolarity is basically constant because I have more sodium, more solute in my bloodstream, but I also reabsorbed a lot of water because water follows sodium. So my osmolarity is constant, okay? Due to the simultaneous increase of both the solute and the volume of my bloodstream. So my blood osmolarity is constant, okay? Whereas the other case here, I'm not letting sodium into my bloodstream, right? I'm only letting water going back to the bloodstream through the aquaporins. So in this case, my bloodstream osmolarity, as you imagine, would decrease, right? Because it's more diluted now. My bloodstream is more diluted now. So the osmolarity decreases, okay? All right. So the other thing I want to mention is that accompanied with the sodium reabsorption that's activated by aldosterone hormone, the potassium and proton secretion would also increase, okay? And then this increase is the reabsorption of sodium ion increases, right? But the secretion of potassium ion and proton increases, meaning they're going to the urine, right? They're getting secreted. So what does that do to the blood acidity and basicity? Does the blood pH increase or decrease when you have more proton secretion accompanied with the increase of sodium reabsorption? The blood pH would increase, right? The bloodstream will be more basic because you're losing the protons, right? Okay. All right, I hope that makes sense. So lastly, the other differences between ADH and aldosterone is one is a peptide hormone, another is steroid hormone. If you want to know more about the difference between peptide hormone versus steroid hormone, as well as amino acid derived hormone, please watch my other video in my biology playlist called Hormone 1, okay? Because I think that's pretty high yield MCAT content. And then the other difference is ADH is secreted by posterior pituitary, whereas the aldosterone is secreted by adrenal cortex. I mean, they all come from the hypothalamus from the get-go, but then they started to have a different pathway. Okay, all right. So that's the differences of ADH and aldosterone. But remember, they really have the same biological effect, which is increasing the blood pressure. Okay, all right. So now let's talk about ANP. What does ANP do? So ANP basically suppresses ADH and aldosterone, okay? Which means what? It would, blood pressure will be decreased by the secretion of ANP hormone, okay? All right, lastly, I want to talk about this biological buffer, this CO2 plus water that produces carbonic acid, and then eventually the bicarbonate, right? So what if I have tons of absorption of bicarbonate? What does that do to my blood pH? Also, when I have a ton of bicarbonate secretion, what does that do to my blood pH? Okay, so basically, when you have a lot of reabsorption, that means you have a lot of bicarbonate in your blood, right? And then if a lot of this in your blood, Lashalle's principle will say, oh, I have so much of this. So Lashalle's principle will drive the reaction toward this way, right? Driving the reaction toward this way meaning what? Meaning you have less proton produced. Less proton produced in your blood, which means your blood is getting more basic, right? So more blood getting more basic. And then the blood pH will increase, okay? That's the case for reabsorption of bicarbonate, okay? What about the secretion of bicarbonate gets increased? Then you will have not that much bicarbonate in your bloodstream because it got secreted. It went to the toilet, right? So in this case, Lashalle's principle, oh, I'm not having enough of this. So it will really drive the reaction towards the right end, right? And then what does that do to your blood? And then you will have a ton of protons, right? Since the reaction is going towards the right direction. So your blood will really get more acidic, and then the pH will decrease, okay? That's the case when you have tons of bicarbonate secretion, okay? So that wraps up my kidney tutorial, okay? I hope that's helpful. Thank you.